Hi, I'm Neil Maycock.
And I'm Greg DeBressac, and this is the Business of Media Tech podcast. So the idea behind the podcast is to delve into a number of the business topics that actually keep our industry, the media tech industry, going, sustainable, healthy, and successful. The idea is to talk with some of the people, the leading figures within the industry about the topics that are really influencing our business today.
This isn't the Neil and Greg show. This is about bringing insight from industry leaders and discussing with them the economic and business aspects of what's happening in the industry. And we want to get CEOs of companies, but also maybe people that you wouldn't ordinarily hear from. So head of procurement, head of HR, talking about talent issues. All aspects of the business need to be covered, and that will we have a more diverse range of people than you might hear from on more the technology-orientated podcasts.
Yeah, those subject matter experts that don't get the write-ups in the press, don't get interviewed all the time, but what they do in our business is just so important to the success of our industry.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of forums in the industry where people talk about the technology, the impact of that, particularly around the trade shows, and there's less talking about the business aspect that we want to focus on. Of course, there are some great events, Devoncroft, DPP, and others where you do get that business focus, but they tend to be event orientated, and then there's a gap in between, and I think that's a gap that we're hoping to fill. But maybe bring some of the people that you might see at one of those events into a podcast event and delve into a bit more detail, 2-on-1 or maybe 2-on-2 in that kind of format.
Yeah, I'm really interested about looking into topics like the structure and the ownership of businesses within our industry, whether public, private, or PE investment is the way to go in a constantly changing industry in transition.
Yeah, I mean, we keep talking about industry consolidation. We see it on the end user side. The media companies at scale are doing that. The vendor community as well. There's consolidation. I mean, you go to one of the trade shows. There's over 1,000 exhibitors for a relatively small market. It's felt unsustainable for a while. So how is that consolidation happening? How's it being financed? And what's the ownership structures look like behind that is something important to delve into. Supply
chain, another big issue that's starting to raise its head again. We might call it 2.0.
Yeah.
It's going to be something that I keep getting told is by the end of this year is going to be a real impacting concept, a real strong influence on the way that we're doing business and the health of our companies.
Yeah, and it's certainly starting to hit the vendor community. A lot of businesses really struggled post-pandemic with the supply chain challenges, and this is a great example because the topic of AI has been talked at every event, right? Everybody talks about AI, but it's all around the technology side and the creative impact of that. How many businesses last year anticipated the fact that NVIDIA were going to hoover up all the RAM and GPUs or data centers would hoover up all of that supply chain, and that was going to impact us? So unintended consequence of AI is now that we've got our 2.0 supply chain challenges. It'll be great talking to procurement people in the vendor community about that. Is that going to start driving people back to the cloud? Is the cloud going to start looking more attractive if you can't buy your own hardware to run stuff on?
Yeah, it's very much a business decision, and it's a business issue that if we all of a sudden the economics of it flip on its head, where all of a sudden the cost of going to the cloud is no longer more expensive than the cost of running something on-prem, does that drive business behavior in ways that we've not seen up until now?
And I think, just look at how we've hit a whole series of topics in a couple of minutes. And I think this is why, we're expecting this podcast to resonate. I think all of these, there's so many areas that you can dig into, these impacting businesses. And the thing that I'm really interested in as well is, how do you plan your business? How do you do a 3 to 5 year strategic plan? I mean, frankly, 3 to 5 months feels a challenge with the rate of change
Yes.
that we're now experiencing, and because we're in a sector that has always had big technology shifts impacting business and how business is conducted. But if you look in the rearview mirror, I think that was largely owned by the media technology sector. So SD to HD, analog to digital,
HD to 4K,
yeah.
SDI to IP.
Exactly. All run by our own standards, processes, our own technology. But now we're being dragged along at a pace we're not used to, with technologies like AI that are being driven at a pace completely outside of our industry. So that's quite a change. And I think, how do you plan and strategize when there's that level of disruption? And there's solutions and content creation aspects of things like AI, but then there are wider issues not just specific to our industry. So what about workforce replacement? There's a lot of people talking about that actually the value of software businesses is decreasing because actually generating code is a lot easier. So how are the skill sets that we need inside companies changing?
Absolutely.
To do that?
We talked about supply chain. Can AI help us with supply chain? So bringing some of these concepts together in a business context rather than a technology context. I'm really interested in things like publicity. How does publicity work in the modern era in media tech? I'm interested in trade shows. What is their purpose in a world where we're moving so much of what we're doing to online? Those sorts of things are really interesting for me in the business of our industry.
Yeah. And I think, let's loop back round on some of the people that we want on the podcast. So one of the first ones we'll be having is we'll have somebody from NAB on the podcast talking about the business of the trade shows and how that's changed. I think pre and post pandemic it's been quite a transition for them. I think there's a lot to talk about, and we're not going to be short of topics. And hopefully, we're going to get some great people on the podcast, so it's not the Neil and Greg show, to give those insights, which should be great.
Yeah. I love the idea of taking different parts of the industry, different people from different size vendors, people from outside of the vendor world that are looking in, whether it be systems integrators, whether it be consultants, whether it be people like the Devoncroft guys, those sorts of people looking in at the industry. Also people potentially that are subject matter experts from the world of AI that are looking in at our industry, that might have a different take on our industry from us looking out. And I think that's really interesting in a world, as you say, where people are where we're moving from being dictated by our own whims, our own dreams, our own standards, into a world where we are but one other way of making and delivering video to the public.
I think related to that, there's new communities and audiences that vendors and the trade shows are trying to engage with. I mean, Pro AV for one. Yeah. Look at the rise of the ISE show.
Well, I was at ISE. It was quite amazing, quite amazing. As big as NAB, but in an incredibly diverse array of people that are all consuming media.
Yeah. And then look at the creator community as well. Yeah. Going from people doing podcasts in their bedrooms to the recent Mr. Beast events
worth 100 million.
Exactly, and like hundreds of cameras on the shoot and stuff. The scale of the production was massive, and then this is growing, and we still have the major events. We've just had the Winter Olympics, but but how those events are being covered and the economics of covering major sporting events is changing all the time. And how are the service providers navigating that?
Absolutely.
And as a service provider, what's happening with the margins? Are you getting squashed between the vendors and the end broadcasters? So many business topics to cover.
Yes, absolutely. And the transition and how that is impacting on really core parts of our business. The other day I was reading something that Arqiva's owner had basically said that their 49% stake in Arqiva was worth nothing. What does that mean in a world where the company that maintains the biggest terrestrial network in Britain is worth essentially nothing?
Yep. And there's multiple companies working in the domain now of satellite replacement.
Absolutely.
So that's been a mainstay of how we got pictures around the world. It's now increasingly over the internet, and we touched on cloud and what's going in the cloud and what isn't. So yes, there's lots of technical conversations going on. We're not always getting the clear economic picture.
Absolutely.
And that's what we've got to pull out in
and
this
ultimately
podcast.
That's what keeps our businesses alive.
Absolutely.
So we're going to kick off around NAB time.
Yes.
And the idea is to shoot a number of podcasts at NAB. And then the idea of releasing one maybe once every 2 weeks or so.
That's sort of frequency, and we'll see what the uptake's like. Yep. And I think sort of aside from being at the main event, so we've got MPTS shortly after NAB, and then obviously IBC later in the year. I think taking the opportunity of people being in one location to interview them and get them on the podcast would be great. Then we'll do some studio-based like this, and then to get a good international reach, we'll also do some online as well. It's about access to these critical people is the important thing that we want to achieve there.
Yeah, fantastic.
And then I think the other thing we'll put on the screen now, contact email. So if anybody wants to suggest some topics for us to cover, or if they're interested in coming on the podcast and talking with us about a particular topic, please reach out to that email on the screen, and we'd love to hear from you. So watch out for updates. The podcast is going to be available on YouTube channel, Spotify. We'll be promoting it on Instagram and mainly on LinkedIn. So watch out for updates as new editions come out. Really looking forward to talking to some interesting people, and really looking forward to hearing from you as well.
Yeah, and looking forward to delving deeply into the business of media tech.